So I missed this headline. Apparently, Trump is back on his fascist rant about punishing people for burning the American flag. There's an article in Forbes.com, Andrew Solander, from the 20th of June 2020, and says that his rally in Tulsa on Saturday, President Trump said he wanted to make flag burning a crime punishable by 1 year in prison. So this isn't new. He said this before. I also dug up a old HuffPost article from December 1st of 2016. And let's see, there's some Gallup polls and some YouGov, today.yougov.com. Not sure exactly what that website's about or how reliable it is. It seems pretty well put together though. But so yeah, obviously this is a clear violation of freedom of speech, the First Amendment, and so on. So it says Trump has stuck to a firm message of, quote, law and order throughout the period of civil unrest that's missing, of civil unrest that resulted from George Floyd's death, sending in the National Guard to quell protests and threatening to deploy the military. As part of his message, Trump has also come down hard on flag burning, which he sees as an epidemic at protests, asking the Supreme Court earlier this month to reconsider Texas v. Johnson, a landmark 1989 ruling that made flag burning constitutionally protected speech. Of course, what the court says doesn't make something constitutionally protected speech, or otherwise, the ruling may be said to recognize it as such. But anybody who understands freedom of speech and expression understands that a government making such an action illegal would be a violation of a person's right of freedom of expression. So it's interesting to me that so many of these people still support this and believe in this. That's just, which, I mean, you could kind of expect it in a certain sense with everything that's been going on lately. The natural nationalist or fascist or, quote, right wing or whatever you'd like to call response to this type of stuff is to increase essentially the authoritarian suppression of things like this, whether it be through so-called martial law or institution of curfews without going the full step. I mean, I don't know how they would. Well, they kind of instituted it without having to bring out the tanks that much with the whole COVID thing, but it's dependent on everybody obeying before they try to bring out the big guns and actually force you to. Though they did in some instances. I remember seeing the videos where they were shooting so-called non-lethal weapons at people on their own front porch in New England and stuff. So let's see what else. He continues, quote, "We have a different court, and I think that it's time we review that again, that Texas v. Johnson ruling. Because when I see flags being burned, they wanted to crawl up flagpoles in Washington and try to burn flags, but we stopped them," Trump reportedly told governors on a phone call. It's interesting that his sentence there is disconnected. He's got two different sentences going on, more or less. Because when I see flags being burned, they wanted to crawl up flagpoles. Like, that doesn't really make any sense. But anyway, we get the general gist of what he's saying. He's a fascist and thinks you should be ultimately punished with death if you end up resisting the police who want to cage you for exercising your freedom of speech. At his Tulsa rally, Trump went into further specifics, calling on the senators in attendance, yada yada, to propose legislation criminalizing flag burning with jail time as a penalty. "We ought to come up with legislation that if you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 year." 1 year, Trump said, claiming he is a big believer in freedom of speech, but calling flag burning desecration. As Mark Stevens says, these are the adventures in legal land. I support freedom of speech, but if you decide to exercise it in ways that I don't like, I'm going to use the violence of government to put you in a cage or worse. This should be an obvious contradiction. Hopefully people are coming to understand liberty a little bit more, and people are not going to support this nonsense, even in light of their fears of communist rebels and things like that, or whatever. I mean, it has to be communist rebels at this point, right? Since in their mind it's never the police, in the conservatives' mind it's never the police who are enforcing these communist laws and stuff. It's never their fault. So the HuffPost article from 2016, Ariel Edwards Levy or Levi, I would assume Levy, it's with a Y. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, Americans think flag burning should be illegal, but few agree with President elect Donald Trump's suggestion of stripping citizenship from those who do so. She cites the Trump tweet. Well, nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail. So he's been harping on the year in jail as well. Um, that's kind of like it's interesting because it's indicative of like a plea bargain type idea. Like you're either going to lose your citizenship or you put one or you go to jail for a year. Which one you really want? Which one's worse in your mind, and so on. In their mind, they probably think loss of citizenship is worse, and it might be if they still decide that they're going to maintain custody of you. Burning a flag is legal protected speech in the U.S., although some lawmakers have called for a constitutional amendment to criminalize the practice. Trump's suggested punishments stand out as exceptionally draconian. Um, any law against this would essentially be draconian. But I mean, I guess right. We can recognize differences in the official punishments meted out by the state, but of course, as government is force, and the only way to really get compliance is ultimately through threatening lethal force if someone decides to defend themselves. It's all essentially a death threat. To me, it is. This is a quote. To me, it is deeply troubling that the person who is going to become the most powerful government official in the United States doesn't understand the first thing about the First Amendment, which is you can't punish people for expressing dissent, and also doesn't seem to understand that citizenship is a constitutional right that cannot be taken away, period, under any circumstances. David D. Cole, a Georgetown University law professor, told the New York Times. So, I'm not really sure about that. I'm pretty sure they can take away your citizenship under certain things, probably treason if they don't give you the death penalty. Um, Other things, aiding the enemy or something like that. Maybe they can't legally, but the state arrogates itself, claims it has the right to decide who can be a citizen and who can't anyway. So it's not like that's really any special privilege that the people who were basically duped into citizenship through the 14th Amendment. That's not really any comfort to them, I imagine. If they understand that, then they understand that citizenship is bogus to begin with. This contract is null and void because it's not a legitimate contract. The rest is obviously legitimate. He doesn't really understand, it seems anyway, the First Amendment or the very concept of freedom of speech. It's more the concept of freedom of speech than the First Amendment, which is just the recognition of that. So, although a majority of Americans recognize that flag burning is currently legal, according to the HuffPost YouGov results, okay, so I guess they're tied here, just 16% think that flag burning is an appropriate way to protest. By an 11-point margin, 48% to 37%, they favor passing a constitutional amendment that would make it illegal to burn the American flag. So, that's actually, if those numbers are truly indicative, that's actually quite worrisome that so many people believe in fascism, essentially. Of course, it's kind of obvious looking around in society when you become a libertarian or an anarchist. So let's see. But by a 6-point margin, 44%. But by a 6-point margin, 44% to 38%, those polled say they'd oppose punishing people who burn the American flag by sentencing them to a year in jail. So people don't agree with the punishment that Trump proposed. And a broad majority of Americans dislike the idea of stripping U.S. citizenship from those who burn the flag. So, it's interesting that there's some support for making this illegal to begin with, but then they don't like the year in jail. So I'm not sure exactly what they would really want to happen with that. Obviously, there should be no fines in regards to that action itself. If you're doing other silly things in the process of burning the flag, like actually endangering other property, and I'm not saying that it should be so vague as to just it would enable these police to stop you no matter what, under the guise of claiming that you're endangering the community property or something. Um, but there should be nothing to do about the fact that you were burning your own property in protest because the property happens to be the symbol of what the state has adopted as its symbol. It's your own property, so this is a property right issue and a freedom of speech issue. It's You can't, without being a fascist, tell people that they can't burn whatever symbol that they want. This is for the conservatives like to pick on the people who think it should be illegal to, in their mind, desecrate Muhammad, and they're just doing the same thing with their own symbol here. So, not too surprising. It's interesting to me that he brought this up during the whole election season, trying to push this through again. Hopefully, this works against him because a lot of people don't seem to like the 1 year in jail, and hopefully by now people have further come to understand liberty in a significant amount that they're gonna second guess this and just be like, why would this guy even be bothering with this? Though we can understand as libertarians, why, because this is incredibly important to the state that its regalia be accepted and respected in society. It's kind of a tell of how much people support that system, and they can't let people, or at least in their mentality, they can't let people go around desecrating the symbols of the state. And they have a very, for the less astute nationalists and things like that, right, they have a very good propaganda device handed to them by these people committing riots and so on and so forth. And the call for defunding the police, I mean, that in itself is an insult to so many nationalists and people who think they're conservatives and stuff to even discuss that. It's those are fighting words to these people most of the time, I would imagine. Um, so it's really no surprise when you understand what the state is and the alleged variances or differences and the variances between people who believe in government on why this would seem to be a more or less understandable reaction from who's a person who's basically a fascist, um, given the situation we find ourselves in. So yeah, just a little bit about that. Pretty obvious stuff. You can't make flag burning illegal. It's a violation of people's freedom of speech. It goes against the Constitution. So, regardless of who's proposed what in the past, they were all wrong. It's not that complicated. Don't overthink it. Just read the First Amendment and, analyze the actions of what's going on in reality when someone's out there protesting and burns their own property that happens to resemble, the same symbol that you got on your property and everything else. The symbol of the government or freedom or whatever you think it is, whether even if you think it's a symbol of freedom, you can't make it illegal if you really believe in freedom.